It was a morning like any other. The sun rose quietly, spilling its golden light across the rooftops, casting long, sleepy shadows on a street where nothing ever really changed. The birds sang their usual tunes. A kettle hissed on the stove. Somewhere, a dog barked half-heartedly at a passing breeze. And inside one of those peaceful little homes, an old man lay in bed, still, silent, unmoving. He would never wake again. His name was Mr. Harold Benton, 72 years old. Not the kind of man you'd expect to go quietly in the night. He was sharp, witty, always had a joke tucked in his back pocket. He went for walks every evening, ate home-cooked meals, never smoked a day in his life. To everyone who knew him, he looked like he'd lived to be 90. But that morning, when his wife came in with his coffee, like she had done every day for the past 48 years, she knew. She didn't have to touch him, didn't have to call his name. The room had that unmistakable stillness, the kind that only comes after the soul has already left. And just like that, the man who had survived wars, raised 3 children, and danced barefoot with his granddaughter under the porch light last summer, was gone. No warnings, no cries for help, no last goodbyes, only a quiet exit so silent it felt cruel. But here's the part no one tells you. Harold's death wasn't sudden. It had been coming for months, maybe even years. Whispering its way in, one soft symptom at a time. A little shortness of breath. A nap that lasted longer than it should. A moment of confusion in the grocery store he'd known for decades. All signs. All messages from the body that most of us ignore because they feel too small to matter. But in truth, they matter more than we realize. You see, the body rarely betrays us without notice. It speaks in subtleties. It warns in whispers. And if we don't listen, if we dismiss those whispers as just old age, then one day, someone we love might go to sleep and never wake up. Just like Harold did. This story isn't meant to frighten you. It's meant to awaken you. Because there are 6 critical signs that often show up before something like this happens. And if he didn't mention it to anyone at first. It was subtle, barely noticeable. A walk to the mailbox that left him just a little more winded than usual. A sigh at the top of the stairs, dismissed with a chuckle. I guess I'm getting old. We tell ourselves that, don't we? That fatigue is just the cost of living long. That a tight chest is just the weather. That breathing a little harder is what 70 feels like. But the truth is, that breath, or more accurately, the loss of it, is often the very first whisper from the body. That something far more dangerous is beginning to stir. Doctors call it dyspnea. Shortness of breath not caused by exertion, but by internal struggle. A heart that's working overtime, lungs filling slowly with fluid, arteries tightening like clenched fists. You don't hear alarms, you don't see red lights, you feel tired, you think it's harmless. But your heart is whispering, help me. Harold had this whisper for months. His wife remembers him pausing halfway through their evening walks, resting on the porch steps, his hand pressed gently over his chest, not in pain, just discomfort. I'm fine, he told her. Just winded. But wind doesn't feel like that, and healthy hearts don't ask for breath that way. You see, the lungs and the heart, they share a sacred rhythm. When one begins to falter, the other struggles to keep up. And that struggle shows itself in the quietest way possible, breath that doesn't come easy. It may happen when tying your shoes, or while reaching up for the teacup on the top shelf. Moments that should be effortless suddenly aren't. It doesn't feel dramatic. That's what makes it dangerous, because the human brain is wired to ignore anything that doesn't scream. And so we wait for pain, we wait for collapse, we wait for the sirens. But by the time those come, it's often too late. So listen, not just with your ears, but with the awareness of someone who knows the value of quiet signs. Breathing should feel like flowing water, effortless, constant, alive. When it doesn't, even if only slightly, something is calling, and it does. Somewhere around his 71st birthday, Harold began taking more naps. Not the kind of naps you look forward to after a long walk or a warm meal. These were different. They came uninvited, in the middle of the day, in the middle of conversations. He'd sit in his recliner to read the paper and drift off before finishing the headline. He'd wake confused, groggy, as if even sleep couldn't refill his tank. His family thought it was normal. He's earned his rest, they said. He's not 40 anymore. And that's the story we all tell, isn't it? We tie exhaustion to birthdays. We tell older adults that feeling drained is just part of the aging package. But there's a difference between the natural slowing of the body and a vital flame beginning to flicker. Fatigue, true, unshakable fatigue, is never just about age. It's the body waving a white flag, a cry muffled under routines and reassurances. You see, real tiredness doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from something inside you working too hard just to keep you upright. Your heart, your lungs, your blood cells, your hormones, all quietly waging wars you never see. In Harold's case, his body was compensating. His heart wasn't pumping as strongly. Oxygen wasn't reaching his tissues with the force it once had. So everything, every motion, every thought, every step cost more energy. And like a candle in still air, his flame dimmed without anyone noticing. Here's what they don't teach you in the doctor's office. Fatigue is not just tiredness. It's cellular struggle. It's the slow erosion of life force. If you wake up more tired than when you went asleep, if your limbs feel heavier than they should, if a simple chore leaves you breathless, unfocused, distant, your body isn't aging, it's waving at you. It's saying something's not right. But we ignore it, we caffeinate it, we nap it away, until one day there's no energy left to recover. That's the thing about vital signs. They don't always come with fevers or flashing lights. Sometimes they come in whispers, like the slow dimming of a flame. And if no one is watching, there's a rhythm inside you, not the beat of a drum or the ticking of a clock, but the ancient, primal pulse of life itself. The human heart begins beating just weeks after conception. And for over 70 years it had never failed Harold. But in his final months something changed. It didn't hurt, it didn't scream, it just faltered. Sometimes he'd feel it late at night, a strange flutter, as if a bird had stirred inside his chest and couldn't find its way out. Other times it felt like a pause, a missing beat followed by a sudden anxious thud. Probably just stress, he told himself. Everyone gets palpitations, but the heart doesn't lie. An irregular heartbeat, what doctors call arrhythmia, is never just noise. It is the whisper of electrical chaos, a signal that the engine of life is no longer running smoothly. And in the elderly, it is often the early shadow of something far darker. Harold's condition, it was likely atrial fibrillation, a silent disruptor of rhythm that increases the risk of stroke fivefold, a condition that can cause blood to pool in the chambers of the heart, clot in silence, and travel like a ticking time bomb to the brain or lungs. He never felt pain, only a mild unease, a skipped beat here, a racing heart there. That's the danger. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it hums, and we ignore it, until that single rogue beat becomes the last one. You see, the elderly often confuse irregular pulses with normal aging. They say, "I'm just nervous," or "that's what hearts do when you're older." But the body knows better. It's not about age, it's about rhythm. And when that rhythm breaks, everything else follows. There's a strange beauty in the heart, how faithfully it beats through joy, through sorrow, through sleep. It doesn't ask for much, just a little attention when it falters. So check your pulse, not just with your fingers, but with your awareness. Feel it, know it. And if it ever skips, races, flutters, or stumbles, don't write it off as nerves. Don't tell yourself it's nothing, because sometimes the heart speaks only once. And whether Harold had always carried a bit of weight around his middle, not enough to worry a doctor, but just enough to make his grandkids call his belly the jelly pillow. He used to joke about it, patting his stomach with a grin after meals. But then something unexpected happened. He started losing weight, not dramatically, not overnight, just slowly, subtly. His pants loosened, his belt notched tighter, his face thinned in photographs. Must be the diet, he chuckled, finally shedding those extra pounds. But he hadn't changed what he ate. He hadn't exercised more. If anything, he was moving less. And still, the scale dipped lower each week. To most people, especially after 70, that might seem like a blessing, a sign of discipline, a quiet victory over aging. But it wasn't. It was erosion, not of fat, but of muscle, of bone, of life itself. You see, unexplained weight loss in older adults is never something to celebrate. It's not a gift, it's a signal. Sometimes it's the digestive system failing to absorb nutrients. Other times it's the thyroid speeding up without warning. And more often than we'd like to admit, it's the body quietly burning itself from the inside. In the early stages of cancer, heart failure, or chronic disease, the body is smart. When something is wrong and energy is scarce, it starts pulling from reserves. Muscles are cannibalized, bones lose density, organs slow to compensate, and the number on the scale goes down. But so does the spark in the eyes, the warmth in the skin, the strength in the hands. Weight loss isn't always a choice. Sometimes it's the body's version of waving goodbye. And what makes it so dangerous is how welcomed it can feel. Compliments pour in. You're looking slimmer. You've lost weight, good for you. But beneath the surface, a quiet war is being lost. That's why, after 65, any unintentional weight loss, more than 5% over 6-12 months, isn't a health trend, it's a red flag. A flag that Harold, like many, mistook for progress. If we could rewind time and ask him, he'd probably still smile, still pat his belly and say, "Guess the old man's shrinking." But now we know what he didn't. Not all loss is good. There's a grief that lives in silence, not the kind that wails or weeps, but the one that sneaks in, when someone you love begins to forget who you are. Harold always had a sharp wit. Crossword puzzles, trivia nights, the daily paper. He thrived on thought. His grandkids would laugh at how he'd rattle off the capitals of obscure countries, or recite the dates of every world war like he'd lived them all. But in the last few weeks, something dimmed. He'd start a sentence and forget where it was going. He'd ask the same question twice in 5 minutes. One day, he got lost walking home from the grocery store, a path he'd walked for over 20 years. Still, he smiled. Just a senior moment, he said, but this wasn't just aging. It was the mind slipping. The brain, like the heart, has its own rhythm, and when that rhythm fractures, when confusion, forgetfulness, or sudden disorientation appear, the body is sounding an alarm. Often people think dementia or Alzheimer's is the only cause, but confusion, especially when it comes on suddenly, can be something far more urgent. Electrolyte imbalances, infections like urinary tract infections or pneumonia, tiny strokes, even heart failure can cause the brain to starve of oxygen, turning clarity into fog. In Harold's case, it was likely the buildup of toxins in his blood, caused by organs beginning to fail. The brain, delicate and noble, was the first to protest. But he didn't scream. He simply asked, "What day is it?" Twice, he misplaced his keys, then forgot why he'd walked into a room. Then one morning, he looked at his wife of 45 years and called her by his sister's name. Moments like these are easy to excuse. We joke, we shrug, we say, it happens to all of us. But deep down, we know when something isn't right. The elderly who begin to forget are not simply getting older. Sometimes they're running out of time. And if we listen, really listen, the confusion isn't just cognitive. It's the soul trying to make sense of something it feels coming. That's why it matters. Harold's story did not end with fear. It ended with a lesson, a gift that only those who truly listen can receive. The signs were there. The silent pulse, the fading weight, the slipping mind. Each a whisper from the body, urging attention, care, and respect. Too often, we wait for tragedy to wake us up. We dismiss the signals as normal aging or simple fatigue. But aging is not the enemy. Ignorance and neglect are. Harold's final gift was awareness. An awareness that every ache, every flutter, every moment of forgetfulness holds meaning. that life's most precious rhythm is not just in our heartbeat, but in our ability to recognize when it's faltering. So what can you do? Listen to your body, honor its signals, reach out when something feels off, and don't wait for the emergency, because the difference between a sudden loss and a life well lived often lies in those small moments of attention. If you found Harold's story meaningful, please share this video with someone you care about. Let's start a conversation, not just about aging, but about living well. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that empower, enlighten, and protect the wisdom of our elders. Your support helps us reach more families who need to hear these vital messages. Remember, the greatest gift we can give ourselves and our loved ones is the gift of awareness, because sometimes listening closely